Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Jenny Irish's prose poetry book, Lupine, or Lupin. I feel like I've heard it pronounced both ways. This is a collection that... So there seems to be this big trend lately, and I'm a big fan of this, of dark feminist reworkings or reclamations of fairy tale stories, characters, figures, particularly villains. And Lupine is in this tradition, I would say. It's a very macabre, gritty, earthy set of prose poems, drawing on traditionally evil or villainous supernatural characters. Vampires, werewolves, sea serpents, furies, characters like this. So prose poetry, I'll mention very quickly. Prose poetry is a genre that is somewhere between flash fiction and poetry. And for me, it's kind of an ill-defined genre. I'm not 100% clear on how one differentiates in a sophisticated way, but prose poetry, with prose poetry, I would say that sound is more significant than it traditionally is with flash fiction or short stories. Sound and the rhythm of language is crucial to poetry, and what prose poems, I would say, broadly attempt to do are to bring that focus on sound and rhythm to a prose form. Now, ironically enough, the first piece that I want to read for you is a more traditional poem, broken up with line breaks, so it is in verse. Artist's statement. This is the first piece in the collection. I've watched an artist take the long, soft line of a dead eel's many-boned, sibilant shape, submerge it in ink, and slap its wet and blackened back against a canvas, to leave behind a vague, dark mark, the stamp of the corpse to evoke the living thing. And so I think in this opening piece, we get some of these elements of the macabre, the dark, the visceral, the bodily focus, the focus on physical suffering and the remains, the physicality of living things or formerly living things, blended into the question of artistic expression. The second piece that I want to read for you is called Prose, and it is a prose poem, this one right here. So yeah, it's visually looks just like a prose paragraph, but because of the focus on sound, because of the focus on rhythm, the way that language moves, it is a prose poem. So, Prose. Like all monsters, I had a mother, and I moved between the trees as slight as a shadow, a slim nothing and nothing more, skirting the scent of greater beasts until I moved beyond the edge of the forest, overstepping the stained line of lightlessness that was the marker no paw should pass, for all wild things meant to be forever unseen. And I crossed this line, and then I moved down and through the toothed black basalt left by the ancient lava flows and into the treeless fields freckled with boulders fallen through the hole in the pocket of time as she made her slow and lurching way along. And then I smelt the lesser beasts, their musk and their blood and their sheep grease, and then I moved lower still, slipping then between the flea-bit and filthy bodies of the half-sleeping ewes, herded together close with their lambs in a circle as craggy as the moon, And then yes, I did tear the bonneted head from a blonde child's shoulders. And yes, it was done with such speed that she was as silent as moonshine in the midst of her own killing. And yes, I was soft-footed as the dark in the night. So again, this visceral, brutal, in this case, murder of a child by presumably a werewolf, is put into this context of artistic creation, a very stylized presentation, and yet at the same time, what we're getting is this almost reclamation of the villain, right? Because the werewolf, traditionally, is a villain. The werewolf is the monster that must be destroyed. In much folklore, in, say, the Universal Monster movies, things like this. The werewolf is traditionally a villain, but here we're getting the werewolf's perspective, this engagement, this awareness with the world around the narrator. And so we get that awareness that I think is really, really interesting and really, really actually common in contemporary, particularly feminist, but also reworkings by people of color, by queer authors, things like this. This self-conscious awareness of the ways in which characters who've traditionally been maligned may in fact represent marginalized identities that have valuable perspectives and alternative perspectives to the mainstream narrative that is itself rooted in patriarchy, heteronormativity, cisnormativity, colonialism, capitalism, etc., Eurocentrism, etc. And so I think these are very interesting reclamation poems within this very macabre, morbid context of violence, death, and suffering. I want to read you two more of them that I really, really like. One is called Sea Serpent. All was depth and vastness, and I lived in awe of my own world before it was made shallow. Sailors swallowed, ships smashed, the spikes along my spine and along my slim and supple spine hot with poison. True. A churning vortex, a wet abyss, the tall tales of tunnels of funneled ocean spinning down into doom, turned to symbols of vaginas as man-eating maws. True. I could create a tempest in my teapot's worth of seawater. None of the stories you have heard and in turn told or to be retold are untrue, but neither are their truths complete. Once I chased a cold current as blue as my own birth, mapping with song the starscape of a galaxy's reflection, the light of which found your eyes already dead. Imagine, if you can, so differently designed, bodies built to wholeness from halves. Imagine, if you can, limbed and protrusive of form as you are. Imagine, if you can, our embowed bodies binding themselves in bliss to make the beef-fed rope that made the knot of our great merging, big as the fist of any god, gone now. Our number too small for the effort to enumerate, less than the definition of the task of counting. You have made me a legend and left me lonesome. When the lion and the tiger were forced face to face, their contrived connection closed at a dead end, a novelty to pace a stage set with jungle pieces, born an unwilling performer, caged behind bars and viewing glass. You and I, we were not meant to meet. There was not, between our greatness and your desire for it, the space enough left for love. And then the last one I want to read you is Mother of All That Crawls, the final poem of the collection. To begin with, husk. Husk, that which protects the flesh as it ripens, and then the flesh is harvested and then consumed. husk, that which is a torn veil of skin discarded. Second, sheath. If not for consumption, but for reception, for insertion and withdrawal, and empty space meant to be filled. Sheath, named for its relationship to a blade. To invaginate, I have learned, is to sheath a sword. I see in men a great worship of violence, the endlessness of battlefields and bloating bodies, and the vultures moving over them with the grace of ghosts, harassed by hand-fed dogs, into brief black thunderclaps of flight, so that the dogs may take their turn wetting their sweet faces red, gourmandizing in the guts of the dead, and carrying home a parasite that embeds in fetal flesh, so a woman will later birth a wonder fit to drown, or be sold for a short, sad life of exhibition. And this is how it was, everyone in their masks of blood, and I knew the ferment of a mother's unspoken disappointment. And now I listen to a million would-be lovers ask, "What's your body count, baby?" And do you imagine that when I spread my abundance and birth to the world, it was to fill it with anything but the fullness of life? So again, it's a really, really interesting collection, and I think this project of reclamation of figures who have traditionally been rejected and seen as villains, seen as enemies, seen as needing to be destroyed, I think is basically a really, really good project.